Thank you very much for joining us. Another story of governance that will be brought to us. I'm not familiar with all of the panel members here, but certainly Joe Hall is no stranger to me or many others. I saw him this morning and I said, I heard you retired, but it didn't surprise me one bit to see him here. Tells me it's a retirement from politics. Reflections on what our elders always tell us is that we need to keep going. We don't retire, our people don't retire, we keep moving forward. So Joe is the example of that, and I invite you, Joe, to make your presentation and also to help to introduce the members of your team.
Good morning. That is almost a line from a mafioso when you said you can never leave the group. So thank you, Angela. And first of all, let me pass on the thank yous to the BC Treaty Commission for giving us an opportunity to share with you here today, as well Elder Larry from the Musqueam First Nation, and obviously as well to the Coast Salish First Nations that have welcomed us to their territory to carry on the work today. Great speakers. I have to adjust my talk because, man, I think there's a lot of similarities in what we're saying from the Manaulth and from the Tanaka and Satsan. I know the hair's not jet black anymore, but certainly the words are still powerful and encouraging and inspiring, and I appreciate that. It's also good when I look out to the crowd to see so many familiar people, which to me, like some say, well, is it time to get off the horse and let others take on the job? But it also tells me that there's a commitment to the work that you're doing, and I applaud that. It's something you don't get the same from the governments. How many of you have seen different people at the table? You just don't get that. And it kind of tells a little bit about where the objectives are with respect to the different parties. I'm going to try and share my time with my colleagues here. Dave Sheppy, who's part of our negotiating team, is going to talk to you a bit about background and process, and our chief negotiator, Jean Tay, is going to talk to you a bit about our approach to negotiations. So we're going to sneak this all in here and within the time frames. But I think that what I want to talk about and what I shared with my colleagues is, rather than getting into the mechanics of the process of how we've got our group together, which is made up of 7 Stalo First Nations located in the eastern Fraser Valley. We have Popcom and Skowlook from the Tate tribe. We have Atchlets, Skowkale, Yukakuyas, and Chiacton from the Chilkoyak tribe, and Lakamo from the north side of the river, which is a tribe unto itself. So we started out as, when Stalo got into the treaty back in 1995, we had 19 First Nation communities that had agreed to get together to negotiate treaties, and over time, that's whittled down for many different reasons. Communities started dropping off. Probably it was, 1995. It's a long time. We've been in negotiations a long time. And so we're now down to 7, and 7 strong, that I'd like to say. And in fact, this whole process and the challenges that we've gone through have made us actually stronger, and it makes our resolve stronger. And I think that the challenges that we've had that actually have created a thinning of our herd, if you will, have I guess in an odd way has made us our resolve that much stronger in moving forward. Because a lot of us have experienced the interference of other governments, not just the province and the feds, but also to local governments and regional districts. They all feel that, and as I think the descriptions that have come, that we're wards of the court, and that we don't really have a right to demand, involvement or participation in decision making, and that in itself has created our desire to move out of the Indian Act. Governments have never made it easy. In fact, again, as I said before, and I want to talk, and it bears repeating, is that it's made that resolve that much stronger. Our generations that are coming along later are less tolerant of oppression, and are more aware to the unfairness that we experience. And And we've been very fortunate that we're not as militant as historical nations have been in other areas, and that we've tried to work these out at the negotiating table, and we continue to work in that regard, because we too, when we talk about our children, future generations, we want a safe environment. We don't want them to have to stand in protests and undertake civil disobedience again, because it's something that you never know where it's going to end up, and so we want to make sure that we don't have to put our children through that. I talked about, and it's been mentioned many times, I'm trying to skip through my notes here because I don't want to repeat what's already been said. It's been said very eloquently, and I think that getting out of the Indian Act has been our biggest motivator, and we have been extremely fortunate in working together as a group that we have like-minded people, that, like the First Nations that I talked about, the 7 First Nations that have survived, if you will, the treaty-making process to date, have got together, and we have a lot of things in common. Like we find that that we want to be progressive, that we have negotiated with government. We've shown that our willingness and desire to improve our community life by getting involved in all the initiatives that essentially have taken back jurisdiction from third parties to our organizations, such as election codes, membership codes, land codes, property taxation, moving down with getting affordable capital from the First Nations Finance Authority, and going through that process of getting our communities, the different types of financial laws, financial management laws. We've had tribal council affiliations. We've entered into servicing agreements. We've had impact benefit agreements. It's basically, we've got a group of people that know what the outcomes of successful negotiation will result in. And this is important, because when we sit, and we just finished a 2-day workshop, actually. We're moving from 4 workshops a year to 5 full workshops with all the elected officials from each of the communities. We get together and talk about some of the questions that we're faced with at the negotiating table, and we're seeking their direction, because we're essentially, that's what we do. We take their issues and put them in front of the treaty negotiating table, and we have found this to be extremely beneficial, and it goes back to what my point and my talk about in my section of this time is to talk about the importance of including the membership in the discussion, because it started with when we saw that there were treaty tables throughout the province where some of them were voting against the EAP, or they're voting against the treaty. And we thought, we don't want to do all this work just to come to a point where we haven't brought our membership along at the same time and have them not provide an informed vote. And it's important that we keep the people involved. And so in order to educate them, we have to make sure that they recognize all the challenges that we're going through, that they recognize why we want to change, because we also found out that many of the off-reserve people are not aware of the impositions of the Indian Act. And it isn't until, all of a sudden says, you're a member, you're going to be losing your tax exemption down the road, and they all of a sudden they haven't been around for 20, 30 years, and they're calling up the office wondering why we're entering into a treaty, because their only benefit was that status card, that tax card. And it's kind of sad thinking for a moment that your Indianness is tied to your right to not pay tax over at Park Royal or wherever you may purchase. And so we're spending more time explaining to the membership that this is, first of all, it's not an Aboriginal right, and we go into detail talking about what the benefits of treaty are going to achieve. We're looking to turn those exemptions into better programs to our community, because we're having the ability to make those decisions about what's best for our community. There's been some really good statistics about communities that are self-governing, that have completed treaty, that they've increased the whole healthiness of their community substantially than those that have remained under the auspices of the Indian Act. There are challenges that we mentioned before, and not the least of which is the recent fiscal policy that was put in front of us not too long ago, and it is, unfortunately it is a huge disincentive to aggregation of First Nations. And it doesn't make any sense at all. There's a lot of policies that we've seen from the federal government that are essentially things that work in the Maritimes don't necessarily work in the province of BC or on the prairies. But unfortunately, that's the way the federal government works, is that the Indian Act policies are to be applied right across Canada. I won't go into the details. I do want to talk to mention as well too the strong sense of family and unity we have working as an aggregate group. Individually, there's challenges, and insofar as with respect to the lands and the program delivery, because in the Stalo community, it's a very close-knit group. A lot of people are related. We've got relations in just about every First Nation out there. And so working as a group, it brings the value of having a diversity of thought in group. Like we have traditionalists and we have contemporary people, and it makes for a very good conversation when we're talking about what it is that you want under treaty. So I think that's been a very valuable reason why I say that working as an aggregation has been successful in helping us build strong policies. We've all, and as well too, we've all suffered the heartache of poverty and oppression and suicide and suffering. And again, that in itself builds the desire to change things, because if we can, in my words, if I've said it before, is if we can prevent one suicide, because we've done something different, rather than continuing to perpetuate governance under the Indian Act, we've made one change. That would be great. And so I think that when we talk about, and it isn't just suicides. I shouldn't just it's also to the people that have unfortunately fallen under substance abuse and they don't finish their life's goals. And because I think everybody has a life goal, it's just a matter, sometimes it gets derailed by substance abuse, poverty, those types of things, and pressures that they receive from others. So I think that my part of my presentation was all about the human interest that we have, and I think that the human interest value of working together as an aggregate. And I find that when we're into discussions, and here too, I know there's Stalo in the room, so what I'm saying is got to be correct, because they'll tell me afterwards, and if I messed up on something. But I'm finding that the partnership work, the communication, and has essentially created more of an interest in what we're doing, and their greater participation in this is valuable to our treaty negotiating team. So I'm going to ask Dave now to come up and talk about the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and great to be here. Have an opportunity to say a few words. I just wanted to begin by doing this and see if that works. Does that fit in there right? Should say Coast Salish Coal Harbor Hotel instead of Coast. And that's, do it again. If there's anybody has tape, we can just leave it up there. A little bit, a little more. Okay. What I'm doing is transforming this podium into a landmark that connects the people and the place. And that's, in my little bit of time here, the story I would want to tell you in terms of our process. We've been with the Xwexwilmexw Treaty Association working on governance for 10 years now, starting with 2006 really, and launching our treaty-related measure projects on governance, where we did initiate a community engagement process, a substantial community engagement process, which has continued on since then to this very day, and taken multiple forms, and as a wave goes through different, takes different forms in the community and the nature of relationships to the community. But that's been a central foundation to the path we've traveled and the way we've gone down this path. The one piece, though, right from the outset that became critical and ties into some of our treaty foundation pieces, our pillars, two of which are governance, self-governance, and a strong, vibrant culture. All right. Linking those two together, we found that in reviewing or visiting governance frameworks and structures, words from Stephen Point Xwexwilmexw, who will be here later on in this forum, I guess on the third day. In any case, words from Xwexwilmexw, what he said, recorded in a documentary we made, that Xwexwils, the transformers, traveled through the land here, making the world right, transforming people into these landmarks, so turning people into stone. And in doing that, Xwexwils defined the land, defined the people, defined who we are as a people, our laws, our values. And so that connection to the land, that transformative action of marking the land with knowledge, effectively, inscribing the land with laws, is ultimately, as he said, it's a constitution. We've always had a constitution, and in fact, it's written in stone. And that was striking to our process and really caused us to pull back and say, what's the underlying foundation on which we can build our structure? Well, this cultural piece, this transformative piece, is really the underlying aspect or foundation to our constitutional framework and governance structure. The key piece of which is to maintain that connection between the people and the place over which there are these authorities and governance relationships that will emerge and be remanifest or reconstituted through the treaty process. So that's really the key point in the story I wanted to tell in terms of our process. Don't want to get into too much detail about what that is, but ultimately it's been a process that has involved and rotated around community engagement and brought the culture and the language into this process as a substantial piece. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Jean Thayer.
So I come here to BC as I'm a Riel. My grandmother was Sarah Riel. My great-grandfather was Louis Riel's little brother. I come from a long line of people who have fought for Aboriginal rights, and one even been hanged for doing that. So when I came first to work with Stalo, I came and I was asked to come and be their chief negotiator, and that was in 2007. And I had just come from many years of working on the Tlichon agreement in the Northwest Territories. And in some ways, there are a lot of similarities. The Tlichon have 4 separate communities. 3 of them are fly-in communities. One is Betchco, now they call it, but Rayedso is what it used to be called, which is a drive from Yellowknife. And they had a saying that I quite loved, and there was a beautiful poster that the late Arthur Pape used to keep in his office that came from them, and it said, "Together today for our children tomorrow." And that was the theme that the Tlicho elders said to us, was what they were doing. Together today for our children tomorrow. Keep your 4 communities together, even if you have to fly to get there. We are one group together. And so when I first came to Stalo, that's what I saw, was that Stalo never approached, from the day I was there anyway, it as if they were going to be separate bands. They were always talking, always. Everything was about pulling it together again. And I'm thinking, I saw this morning as I got out of my house a raven fly over. Actually, probably it was a crow, but it had an egg in its mouth, and it was quite huge, and it was struggling because its mouth was really huge with this egg in it. And I sort of thought, yeah, and if it drops that egg, then that's all smashed, and then you've got those Indian Act bands, which is the little piece that you're trying to pick up here. And that's sort of what it feels like sometimes, is trying to put that egg back together again in this situation. But the people, the Stalo, are very clear. They want it to be whole. They want to bring it together. And there's huge challenges. Some of our bands are in urban situations, like Chiacton, pretty much right downtown in Chilliwack. Some of them, like Skauluk, are out in a rural situation, a beautiful rural situation, but rural. They're separated geographically by miles. Some of them are on the river. Some of them are on the Fraser River. Some of them are not. Some of them, they're separated by the Indian Act band system. Some of them are in separate tribes, as Joe described them. And one of the big problems we have is what I call city creep. So Vancouver is creeping up the valley, and Abbotsford is creeping, and Chilliwack is creeping, and Mission is creeping. And it doesn't take a lot to see that in another 25 years, it is going to be solid city, right? The only thing that's stopping that right now is the agricultural land reserve, and that's being chipped away at. But basically, it's going to be solid city. And Chilliwack's going to be a suburb of Vancouver, and that's what it's going to look like, right? So those are the issues that we're trying to work with here. And how did our approach? Our approach was that we sat and we did a 100-year or 7-generation visionary thing. We said, okay, what is it going to look like in 100 years or 7 generations if nothing happens, if you're still an Indian Act band? And we did population projections, and we're about 1,500 people right now. And I don't know if you know this, but Aboriginal people are having a baby boom right now. And our projections, and believe me, we took the conservative projection, says that in about 100 years, we're going to be 1,500 people, not 15,000 people, not 1,500 people. So if in 100 years we do not enter into treaty and get more land, you're going to be that many people on the same tiny little specks of land. It doesn't take much to see where government funding is going. It's not getting bigger. And the programs are being diminished, and the money's being diminished, and the land is being encroached on all sides. We have one of our bands is completely surrounded by an industrial park, and so living on that is a health hazard. It's terrible, but because the city doesn't care about what the people on the reserve, that people are living there, that's the reality of it. It doesn't take a lot to look into the future and see a very ugly picture of too many people, not enough land, not enough resources, and we already think there's too many people on small pieces of land with not enough government and not enough resources. It's going to get magnified. So when we looked at this and we said, okay, 100 years down the road, if you have more jurisdiction, more land, your ability to make your own money and your own self-governance, that's the goal. So that was for the Xwexwilmexw. That's the idea of our approach to government, is the idea of trying to make it whole, keep them whole, but not create a new people, because these 7 are just part of the larger Stalo. And so there's no way, we're not trying, and we have to keep banging on the table and saying, no, 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 we're not setting up a new people here. They will be Stalo, they'll just have they won't be under the Indian Act, they'll have a different governance system, they'll have a little bit more land, but they're still Stalo. One of the other big challenges that we have is that, and this isn't a surprise to all the Aboriginal people in the room, but it appears to be a big shock to non-Aboriginal people, which is that Aboriginal spirituality, sacred sites, and cultural sites are not on the reserves, right? They're out on the land. And so you cannot protect the culture of the people if they're not able to protect their cultural sites and access their cultural sites, which are not on either treaty settlement land or on your reserve lands. And what we don't want to do is select important Stalo cultural sites, because they belong to all of the Stalo, not just the 7 that are in treaty. But we still want them protected. But we don't want to own those lands, right? Because we're not the only ones who are in there doing this. So these are huge challenges, and I've literally had federal government people. One of the huge Stalo sites moments had CP, who blew it up? CN just blew it up one day. You know, there's not even any really good reason for it. They just, sometimes I think they just like to play with dynamite, but they went out there and just literally blew this thing up, didn't talk to anybody, didn't and literally had no idea what they were doing. But it's an example of the fact that if the sacred sites are not identified, they'll just go out there and destroy them, which is what they did. And I literally had a federal government negotiator say to me, well, how can that still be important to you when it's gone? And I said, well, you know, are you Christian? Isn't your Jesus dead and gone? Seems to be important to you. So what, I mean, don't you get, they don't get it, right? They don't seem to be able to put themselves in any other way of a framework of looking at things. So the challenges we have, this group of 7 want to be Stalo, but they want to be one. They do not want to be Indian Act bands anymore. They want to function as one. And as Grand Chief Joe Hall said, we just spent 2 intensive days going over this, and it was really amazing affirmation from everybody in that room. We are one, and they said it in a million different ways over, and they also said some great things like the Indian Act sucks. I like that line. But we are one was one of the big lines that everybody keeps coming back to. So the governance is going to be one government structure. It's going to be, everything is going to be done by a collective body. And it makes sense for Stalo, the more I learned about Stalo. They're all intermarried, right? It doesn't matter what band you're on, right? You know, you're intermarried with all people from different hands. The hereditary names that pass down responsibilities and fishing sites have nothing to do with bands. They travel from families or into the hereditary system. Nothing fits the band structure. Absolutely nothing. So that model has to go, and that's the decision of the Stalo, and that's the way they've always negotiated as one group. That group has changed, but it's always been a whole, and keep it whole, and to keep it as what government likes to call it, an aggregate group. We don't think of ourselves as that term, but that's what they do. And just to echo what Joe said, some of the new policies that are coming forward are making it very, very, very difficult to do. This new fiscal policy is not just a detriment, it's just about a killer for an aggregate group. When we run the numbers from the new fiscal policy, it's millions of dollars of difference. So then it's almost as if government is wanting us to go in and be 7 separate governance with 7 of everything and all that stuff, because then you get more money. And it's crazy. It's a crazy approach. And it's also, the new fiscal policy removes our ability to negotiate finances in the future to a large extent. And it returns us to a reporting system, which is what you have under the band system. I know some of you, I bet some of you are here, you know, some people are reporting out 50, 70, 80 times a year on money and all the contribution agreements. This is putting us back into that model. So we're really disturbed by that return to that fiscal, we regard it as a huge step backwards. So we're hoping that the government is going to reassess that policy, because we find it, you know, it's like we take 2 steps forward in this stuff and then you end up taking 4 steps backwards. And that's what that is for us. So it undermines our whole vision of keeping Stalo whole and keeping Stalo as one united group that can protect itself together today for our children tomorrow. And that's what they've said is the most important thing, is for the children. And so I echo what Satsan said this morning. That's what this is all about, is us bringing our past and our experience and our families and our knowledge to make it better for our children tomorrow. And so that's the line that I bring from the Tlichon in the north and what I hear from the Stalo today. So thank you very much.